They're in the building and ICE is there. So Brad Lander tries to prevent this from happening, and then they end up arresting Brad Lander, and it becomes international news. I was one of the only reporters, me and the city, and I think the AP were there. It was...
You were right in the middle of it.
I was in the middle. ICE was...
Courtney was saying, get your hands off me.
I said...
Mamdani beats Cuomo by 34 points.
Right. Wow.
Cuomo beats him by 30 points when we're talking about 45 or older. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of see something similar with education level, right? Non-college graduates, Cuomo wins by 37 points. Mm-hmm. College graduates, Mamdani wins by 9 points.
Welcome to New York One's Off Topic on Politics. I'm New York One's investigative reporter, Courtney Gross. An arrest by ICE, tears on the campaign trail, and a new poll showing the race tightening up ever so slightly. There is a lot happening on the campaign trail this week, and we're here to catch you up on all of it. And after that, we will give you a quick rundown on the City Comptroller's race, where you have Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine facing off against Brooklyn City Councilman Justin Brannan. We'll get to all of it, and joining me, as he does usually, Bobby Cuza is here.
Courtney, I think you got to get more credit for being up close and personal when Brad Lander got arrested by ICE.
No, we have to hold your thoughts on that.
You got some good video, though.
Yeah, we did. It was an intense situation. There's been so much reporting about what's going on in Manhattan Immigration Court, and I think I hadn't been there. This was the first time I'd been there, and I know we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but I'll just preface with, it is just a startling situation when you are in a room in immigration court and you have a number, I would say a dozen or so, maybe a little bit less, ICE officers with masks in the hallways just waiting to kind of nab people. It's certainly, I don't know if I would think it'd be unprecedented. Our Bernadette Hogan is also here. She's going to talk about this too.
Yeah, also been on the campaign trail, although my candidate was not arrested by ICE.
No. Okay, so first let's talk about the poll, just so everybody gets the lay of the land and where things are right now. We got a new poll from Marist. All of us have papers on the table. Mm-hmm. Bobby and I have the actual poll, I think, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And I have it in my head.
Bernadette memorized it. So she gets extra points, A+ for Bernadette. But the new poll from Marist shows that Andrew Cuomo, in terms of first choice, has 38% of the vote. Mamdani has 27% of the vote. Zohran Mamdani, I don't know if that was our first reference to him so far in the podcast. Brad Lander has 7% of the vote. Adrienne Adams, 7%, and so on and so forth. The rest are in single digits. We should note that this poll was taken from June 9th through June 12th, presumably before our debate, which was maybe crucial for a lot of people. I certainly hope so.
Before the cross endorsement of Lander and Mamdani.
Bernie Sanders endorsement.
And then obviously this ICE arrest. So where do you guys think, the poll, now I have to flip my pages here. The poll shows, this is, like I said, from Marist, this is the June is 38 to 27 for Cuomo and Mamdani, and the May numbers were 37 to 18. So if anything, it shows that Mamdani is certainly closing the gap by 9 points here, but how many days are we from Election Day? We're taping Thursday afternoon, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday.
5 days. Good math.
Quick on your feet.
This is one of those polls where
I had to count. So
it's hard to know. When I first saw the poll, it's hard to know what the headline is, because on the one hand, it's like Mamdani significantly cuts Cuomo's lead.
Sure. But he's still down by double digits.
Right. Or Cuomo maintains a significant lead, a week before Election Day. So he cut into the lead.
Cuomo gained 1 point. So he's clearly, this his ceiling, right?
And the question too for Mamdani, what is his ceiling? Because we did see him pick up Latino support. Because Latino and Black support are the areas where Mamdani has struggled. But I was with Mamdani the past couple of days, and he actually credited the endorsement from Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for that boost in Latino support. So that's really interesting. But I
41, just so they know, 41% of Latinos are supporting Mamdani, 36% are supporting Cuomo. So that was definitely, I don't have the previous version of the poll, but that's definitely a significant increase for him.
And that's a cause of concern for Andrew Cuomo, because he with ranked choice, right? It's only our second time doing it for a Democratic mayoral primary. Andrew Cuomo, we're in a primary. We don't have independents, but we do have this group of 11%, I think, undecided. Do they come out and vote? do they go for Cuomo? Do they go for Mamdani? And Andrew Cuomo has, the lockdown with majority Black support. He's
48%, right?
And that's a huge
48%,
voting bloc.
nearly half.
This group tends to be older. They tend to come out and vote, and that's huge. But the question is, what happens with this, again, this 11% of undecided? Do they come to the polls?
I think if you look at the crosstabs, the demographics, it is just so wild to me, the divide in some of these demographic categories. I mean, obviously the big one being age. Under 45, Mamdani beats Cuomo by 34 points.
Right.
Wow.
Cuomo beats him by 30 points when we're talking about 45 or older. And then you kind of see something similar with education level, right? Non-college graduates, Cuomo wins by 37 points. College graduates, Mamdani wins by 9 points. So
Income too.
Is a big spread.
Lower income, less than 50K a year, you support Cuomo.
Cuomo, right.
Higher income, you support Mamdani.
Which is totally counterintuitive because Mamdani is the candidate of, he champions the working class, and the working class all goes for Cuomo.
Well,
they don't all go for Cuomo.
He like signifies like the elitism of the Democratic Party, like a little bit, right? Like this struggle that you saw post-presidential election is so many said that the Democratic Party no longer stood for the working class. And I think you're seeing that this elite, wealthy, white Democrat go for someone like Mamdani.
Right. And another thing, I'll actually look at some of Cuomo's campaign promises. $20 minimum wage. I mean, who does that speak to? That speaks to that demographic of people making less than $50,000, those who might not have a college degree. Like that, they must have done internal
Yeah, but you can
polling
make the same argument for Mamdani's positions too, obviously, like free buses, free childcare.
You could, but
rent-frees.
Cuomo's the one who really has been like, this is my, like, I mean, Mamdani has talked about it, but Cuomo really put that on blast.
Right, but that's, ironically, Cuomo is considered the moderate in the race.
Sure.
And Mamdani tries to paint him as the candidate of the billionaire class.
Yeah, and also at the end of the day, like a lot of these things that Cuomo's bringing up, like he either has done or said he would do as governor. I mean, he did.
Right, minimum wage.
But then
After much pressure.
After much pressure, and also didn't tie it to inflation, which rarely do governors
and Cuomo's talked about free buses too, right? Didn't he adopt that partially based on?
I don't remember.
What year it
You
was?
might be
I think
right,
it was
though.
2021.
What do you mean when it
During
was
COVID, though?
When he talked about it? No, I mean more recently though in this campaign.
Yes.
So, and also I would point out in the poll, the male-female split, women, Cuomo is so much more likely to win women voters than like the male vote. Cuomo's up by 3 points over Mamdani.
Which fascinating.
Again, counterintuitive, given that this is the guy who was driven from office because of sexual harassment allegations.
And ongoing lawsuits that, I mean, he's still pursuing a civil case against Charlotte Bennett, one of his accusers. And actually just last week I was with him and I said, you're asking for a second chance. How will you be able to continue to attract talent and be a leader? And he said, well, they're not well-documented cases. They've all been dismissed.
Which is not true. There are multiple cases that are ongoing.
Multiple cases ongoing.
Yeah.
And also
the Trooper case. The
Charlotte Bennett case.
The Charlotte Bennett case is done.
Well, he's still pursuing a defamation case against her.
Yes.
She settled with the state. And now, I mean,
and there's one other case that's upstate that's ongoing. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole of sexual harassment.
It's just interesting.
Yes, it is interesting. Okay. So this is the lay of the land, how many days out, how much of a good position do you think Mamdani is? There was this very interesting analysis, I should say, by Gothamist and WNYC, who got some early voting data. And what we're seeing is the early returns at the polls, the people that are going to vote, there's double the amount of people when you compare it to 2021.
Right.
In addition, the analysis that WNYC and Gothamist did showed where those voters are coming from and the ages of those voters.
Right.
And they are appearing to be potentially Mamdani voters. It's unclear because they're coming from certain brownstone Brooklyn areas and they're younger, skewing younger. The question is, are these new voters that are turning out and he's turning out this whole new electorate that has never voted before? or are these just voters that were going to vote anyway?
Right. I mean, and again, Mamdani does best among voters in Brownstone, Brooklyn, and also among younger voters. I asked him about it today, right? It's Thursday. And I was like, what do you make of these early returns? Are they going towards you? And one of the things he says is, you know, you can see that the rival campaign, the Cuomo campaign, is nervous about reading stories like this. And that's why they're dumping millions of dollars into the pro-Cuomo super PAC, Fix the City, because they're trying to stamp out and play it with a money game. You know, the Cuomo side can really pump a ton of money to keep Mamdani from office. But Mamdani really does have a special inroad and insight with younger people, with first-time voters, and with just active voters in Brooklyn. I mean, hipster Brooklyn.
We're laughing.
I almost said
because
hippie.
Bernadette said hippie.
Sorry, I'm stuck in the wrong age.
Yeah, it was
Hippie
I thought I was in California, but it's just interesting. I mean, Mamdani. I was in Astoria, Queens today, which is his district, and you do have predominantly younger people coming up to him or just walking in tow, and you do not generally see that with Andrew Cuomo.
By the way, it's going to be really hot on Tuesday, and
BOE is already putting out warnings that they're going to prioritize
to the extent that keeps older people home.
I was just going to say, Andrew Cuomo's campaign, I think they just put out a tweet saying, you know, some protective measures, which we've seen in past campaigns. Look at the Tom Suozzi special election. It snowed on that day, and Republicans tend to come out during on election day, but a lot of Democrats came out and voted in the early voting, so there was low turnout on the Republican end. Tom Suozzi ended up winning. But again, if you were planning on coming out on election day, if you're an older voter, the heat is absolutely something that would keep you at home.
One other thing we should know, because this could be our final podcast before Election Day, it depends on what happens on the campaign trail and if you get any special pods in your feed, but you are not going to get most likely the full results on election night, because with ranked choice voting, or RCV, like we like to call it, you know, there is no winner declared unless someone gets 50% plus one vote. And the Board of Elections, does not run the ranked choice voting tabulations for a week. They will be doing this at July 1 on noon. So you get to know the first choice votes on election night, and you should watch New York 1. Will be live for much of the night, probably
for
past 11, probably till midnight. We'll see how late we go. And then you'll have to tune back in again the following Tuesday to get the ranked choice voting.
At noon. Which is a little strange. But
high noon.
I mean, honestly, I'm not sure that we in the media have done a great job of informing people, like, Tuesday night, we're not going to know the winner. I mean, we'll know who's in the lead.
Hold up, we didn't know until recently, right? We didn't know.
No, that was the way it was in 2021 too.
That was okay. I was surprised when I found this out like a couple weeks ago too.
And by the way,
the reason why, I was just on the phone with the Board of Elections, and I knew you've talked to Vinny Ignazio at the Board of Elections as well. The reason why is that there are, you know, more than 3,000 machines at over 1,200 poll sites in order to do the ranked choice voting tabulations on their special ranked choice voting computer machine. You need to take the memory sticks from all of these voting machines, bring them physically to the computer and upload them. They don't upload them for ranked choice voting algorithm through the cloud. You need to physically do it. So that type of manpower, women power, people power it takes to bring all of that actual physical equipment to one place takes a while. I know.
But also, I thought part of it was that they're waiting for all the outstanding votes to come in, the absentees and the mail-in votes.
The absentees have to arrive by July 1, and then you have actually like 2 weeks to cure your absentee as part of a law that passed by the state legislature a couple of years ago. But it is more a factor, I'm told, by the Board of Elections of getting the physical equipment in one place and running it that way versus the actual absentee votes. The absentee was much more of a factor back in 2021 when we were still in COVID and so many people voted by absentee, but it's less of a factor this time around.
By the way, the Marist poll does the ranked choice simulation, and Cuomo still wins in the final round by 10 points.
The whole headline.
Which, I mean, Mamdani, you would think, would pick up support from Lander voters, from Zelnor Myrie voters, and he does pick up some. I mean, this is the same thing that happened with the last poll. I think it was the Emerson poll that came out. I'm looking at the simulation in round 6. Once you're down to 3 candidates, Cuomo his lead has actually grown. He's up by 13 points, and then Lander When he gets eliminated, he has 13%. And in order to catch up, Mamdani needs to get all of those voters.
Yeah.
But he doesn't. I mean, more Lander votes turn into Mamdani votes than turn into Cuomo votes, but it's like 60-40, and that's not good enough.
This leads us to our Lander conversation. They obviously, I think after we taped the podcast last week, they did the cross endorsement of Lander and Mamdani on Friday of last week. And then since then, we mentioned it at the top of the podcast. I was in immigration court with Brad Lander on Tuesday. This is the third time he's gone down to Lower Manhattan to immigration court to observe proceedings there. And this is where someone goes if they're in the process of deportation proceedings. They appear before an immigration judge. And what is happening now is immigration judges are often dismissing these cases, which means that whatever person's status they had originally is now dismissed. It's gone. They have no status in the country. And these ICE agents, like I referred to before, are lining up these hallways and basically descending on the person and handcuffing them and arresting them and detaining them on site. Brad Lander has been going to escort people out to try to protect them from this process. He's doing it with this other nonprofit organization called Immigration Arc. He went to do that. He had two, in fact, immigrants ripped from his arms and taken away and detained. And then the final person, named Edgardo, a Spanish-speaking immigrant, Lander locks arms with him. Then all of a sudden, ICE agents descend upon this group. ICE agents try to pull them apart. Lander screams for a judicial warrant, which they actually don't even need. He's like, show me your judicial warrant. I'm not letting go until you show me your judicial warrant. And then I find out later that you don't need it, actually, because ICE can essentially detain anyone they want when in immigration court because you're going through a deportation proceeding, which is interesting quirk and loophole that allows them to detain so many people through this process.
Wait, but can I ask you, because I don't know the answer, those people who are going through that court process, they're already marked for deportation or not necessarily?
So many of them, it depends on the case, it's right. Many of them are going through the asylum process or asking for asylum. What is happening, immigration attorneys tell me, is more often than not, their first court hearing, the government now under the Trump administration is moving to dismiss the case, which means that in a sense it's tossed out and you no longer have status. What is happening is the government moves to dismiss the case, and depending on the judge will say, okay, come back in 10 days with a lawyer so that we can sort this out. You can plead your case. Come back in 2 months with a lawyer. Because more often than not, these people do not have lawyers or representation before them in this immigration proceeding and in this immigration court. What had been the case under the Biden administration is they would allow these proceedings to go through the process, and you would have an immigration lawyer and you would be able to make your case in court and have this due process saying, I have fear going back to my country and I will be the target of a gang if I go back to my country. But instead, under the Trump administration, these ICE agents are just descending upon them when they even have their first hearing in this hallway in Lower Manhattan and taking them and detaining them and basically having an expedited removal by the nature of them showing up to these court processes. It's so interesting that these people are trying to follow the rules, go to court, do it the right way, but by just being in the building, they're setting themselves up to be deported because they're in the building and ICE is there. So Brad Lander tries to prevent this from happening, and then they end up arresting Brad Lander, and it becomes international news. I was one of the only reporters, me and the city, and I think the AP were there. It was...
You're right in the middle of it.
I was in the middle. ICE was...
Courtney was saying, get your hands off me.
I said,
I could hear her.
Well, what they did say is they said,
the Irish in her.
They were like, we're trying to keep you safe. And I was like, I'm safe.
Yeah, I know. I was like,
were they trying to push you away? Or
yes, they were trying to push me away. And I was trying to get my shot. And I was like, saying, I'm press, I'm coming too. Right. And they're like, back up, we're trying to keep you safe. And I was like, I'm safe, thanks. But,
I can take care of myself. You're holding up your phone, right?
Yes, I didn't have a big camera with me. It was much easier to shoot with my phone and see what was happening. Brad Lander was detained for 4.5 hours. The governor comes, he's released. They have this big press conference. I mean, we don't need to talk about the particulars of why Lander was detained. Let's talk about the political aspects of it and like what it means for his campaign, because this comes after the choice, the Times panel coming out saying Brad Lander is their choice. He has a good debate performance. We already talked about. And then the cross endorsement, like he's having a moment
Right. And he's kind of having the moment that he thought, I'm sure his campaign thought that he would have going into and kind of sustaining throughout this entire campaign before Andrew Cuomo entered the race, before Adrienne Adams entered the ring, and before Zohran Mamdani picked up all this steam. Because if you would talk to anybody at the beginning of, this whole mayoral process, Brad Lander was hoping to get all of the progressive accolades and also kind of like waltz into this Democratic
and the New York Times
nomination.
endorsement, which he didn't get. The Times did come out with some non-endorsement,
saying Brad Lander's the best one.
Saying Brad Lander is has no inspiration.
He's not inspiring, but like he's the most
competent
solid
or something.
But yeah,
but then they also just rail against Mamdani and basically tell New Yorkers to not rank him on the ballot.
But with Lander, it's interesting because look, like the context of it all is we're in the middle of a very contentious mayoral primary. Brad Lander is arguably the third slot in the race. He goes in there, and I mean, there is the very real possibility that he could be arrested. I don't think he was going in there intending to be.
It didn't feel like a stunt to me. Like in 2013, de Blasio was arrested outside
he was planning to get
outside of
arrested.
a hospital that was closing in Cobble Hill, and it was very orchestrated. Like everyone knew it was going to happen. This did not seem that way.
And it didn't look that way either. But I guess the comparison of like Brad Lander's inserting himself in a situation that so many immigrants are going through. And it was a really good bird's eye view, especially from you being able to take video of like what's going on, because we really haven't seen videos like this or the stories of these immigrants, because a lot of them are non-English speakers. I mean, not even Spanish, but like other languages.
Someone was from Africa.
From
Africa. Spoke a language I had never heard of before, and the translator was in French. Like nobody even spoke his language in the building. We had no idea what was going on.
But then Brad Lander gets detained, and he's sitting in there for 3 to 4 hours, and then all of a sudden the governor shows up and he's let out kind of immediately. And to me, I'm watching this and I'm like, the Brad Lander's very fortunate that the governor can show up and break him loose. But
it was a good moment for her.
It was a good moment for them.
She tweeted out Excelsior with a photo of the two of them.
But at the same time, it's like, well, what about all these other people that this is happening to?
Yeah.
Like Brad Lander benefits from this, and the governor has her moment, and then she sends out a fundraising email afterwards saying it. But it's like, this is international news, and it just, to me, I'm watching it of the scale of like, this guy is running for mayor. He also provided the public a really good bird's eye view, but at the same time, what's going on if the governor has to come in to spring you loose? And what about all these other people?
Well, I mean, but so it's working on multiple levels, right? He's drawing attention to this issue.
Yes, it was multifaceted.
But from a political perspective, I mean, there's nothing better that could have happened to Brad Lander than getting arrested the other day. I'm not saying he planned to get arrested. I don't think he did.
Right.
But I mean, look what happens. He was on MSNBC that night on Chris Hayes.
He's been on MSNBC multiple times.
Right. Chris Hayes leads his show. He's on Ezra Klein wrote a column about him in the New York Times yesterday.
But what is
he's on New York One.
Is it too little too late?
Right. I mean.
And also, what does it do for like immigration policy? Nothing, I would argue.
I mean, it does.
What happens to that guy that he was with?
Yeah, nobody can track down the guy.
No one can track down these people that like this is happening to and are not having due process, but like,
I mean,
he had a good moment.
I mean, look, Brad Lander, I'm looking at the Marist poll again. In the ranked choice simulation, he starts at 8%. So
it only goes up to 13.
Right. So Brad Lander has a lot of ground to make up, and I don't know if this is going to do it, but I mean, there's nothing he could have done to have gained himself more publicity than what happened on Tuesday.
So speaking of publicity, I want to make sure we get to talk about Mamdani and we haven't even talked about Cuomo. I feel like Cuomo's just back to status quo, right? So we can just say that, sum that up as status Cuomo. He's in the Bronx. He's doing his thing. I mean,
Bloomberg now has donated over $8 million.
Supporters are very worried.
$8.3 million to his super PAC.
His supporters are definitely very worried that Mamdani is going to gain on him. But he's generally just like going, I don't want to say going through the motions because he's actually out there campaigning.
Right.
And Ayanna has been with him a lot.
He had been.
Yes. And so
but he's in a truck being driven around, so he doesn't actually have to interact with voters.
Well, he's in Co-op City, so I'm not sure what the interaction was this afternoon. Nonetheless, he's certainly going after Mamdani repeatedly over being a so-called anti-Semitic person.
Yeah, and for having no experience.
But I want to talk about the anti-Semitic issue because it's gaining some traction, obviously. We've talked about it on the podcast in the past, but essentially what happened this week is Mamdani was on a podcast called The Bulwark, and he was asked about the phrase globalize the Intifada, which refers to the Intifada that obviously happened in the 90s and the early 2000s in Israel and Palestine, where Palestinians were sending suicide bombers into Israel, and it was obviously very violent. For Mamdani, he wouldn't criticize the phrase. Bern, you were there, so explain what happened.
Sure. So Mamdani, he was explaining it in this interview with the Bulwark, saying, look, like the literal translation and the translation that the Holocaust Museum uses in Arabic means the rising up, right? And he's like, I take this phrase to be, kind of something that oppressed peoples are taking and to, assist with their struggle. He took it as like an academic and literal interpretation of what it means in Arabic. However, the Holocaust Museum tweeted yesterday, so Wednesday, saying, and I have a snippet of it, let me just pull it up, but they said, exploiting the museum in the Warsaw Ghetto uprising to sanitize, quote, globalize the Intifada is outrageous and especially offensive to survivors. Since 1987, Jews have been attacked and murdered under this banner. And so
he essentially said that in the Warsaw Ghetto, they also used the word Intifada as rising up. So he was making the parallel there.
Making
and
the
obviously,
parallel, right.
Some Jews, the Holocaust Museum are offended by this because the phrase to some Jewish people is considered highly offensive, as if it were condoning violence against Jews across the country.
Right.
And even Brad Lander has come out, back to Brad, saying that he
said this, he goes, quote, maybe you don't mean to be saying it's open season against the Jews, but that's what I hear. And Brad Lander has cross-endorsed Mamdani. And so the two of them really do have differing opinions about what this phrase means, and also just the relationship between the U.S. and Israel. And we don't need to go into that.
No, definitely not.
But the point of all of this, and Mamdani was taking a lot of heat, not just from rival campaigns, but again, just centering on the Holocaust Museum, saying, we're speaking for Jewish people that we represent, and that this phrase is associated with a lot of terror and the violence against Jews.
And how can you not condemn it?
And how can you not condemn it? And it's really upsetting. And so Mamdani gave this response. Reporters asked him a bunch of questions in many different ways. And finally, Melissa Russo from NBC said, when you're asked about this, it's hard. We don't see emotion from you. And that's one of the reasons why you are getting criticized for being anti-Semitic. I don't think you're anti-Semitic. And Mamdani has also, responded to that. He's like, look, I'm not. I have Jewish friends. I love the Jewish people. But Russo's question was, they just hear these academic responses from you and not an emotional response. And then Mamdani, in answering, gets emotional, and he says, it makes me so upset that I could be called somebody who harbors hate because I've been the subject of hate. I'm Muslim. I've received death threats. My family has received death threats, and I don't talk about it a lot, but this is really hard for me too. And so that was he came here. We were talking about this before we pressed record. He came here probably around 1999 as a 7-year-old kid, and 2 years later, 9/11 happened, and he's a Muslim in New York City. And we all know that there was a lot of racism and discrimination, probably to this day, and surveillance
against Muslims in New York City.
Yes.
And around the country.
Yes. And Mamdani, he opened up and talked about that. And we have not seen him, he was choking up, he was crying.
Yeah, I was going to say tears. There were tears.
And so
were they crocodile tears?
So he's talking about that, but again, it kind of goes to this overall point of he's getting a lot of heat from rival campaigns, and then also from Jewish New Yorkers who say, listen, you refuse to abandon what you might believe or your ideology, and you can't just, I guess, empathize, which he would probably argue against. But, Mamdani, as a legislator, has been someone who tweets about Middle Eastern politics, what's been going on between the war between Israel and Palestine. He's very vocal about this. He has sponsored legislation, boycott, sanctions, and divestment. He's very vocal in this field. And so,
but I think it shows, and this is what we've been talking about in the newsroom, is so much of the reporting about Mamdani is about how he's unwilling to compromise and perhaps see a different perspective. conservative. And this might be one of those cases where he's so steadfast on his beliefs and his belief system that he can't necessarily see the other side and see that it would be offensive. Like, it's not that hard to condemn something that is seen as violent rhetoric by a certain class or group of people. It's not, especially if you're the mayor of New York City representing how many hundreds of thousands, if not more than 1 million Jews.
Right. And at this moment, we are dealing with all-out war in the Middle East, no matter where you stand on it. And just horrific October 7th attacks. Like, it's just very prevalent right now in the minds of New Yorkers and Americans. Massive college protests. This is just very much a part of what's going on in the global and the New York conversation.
Okay, I think we're going to have to leave it there about the mayor's race. We could talk about it for hours, but we got to move on a little bit to the comptroller's race so people are educated when they get to the polls. But before that, as you get ready to vote with your personalized voter guide on the New York Spectrum, get ready to vote with your personalized voter guide on the Spectrum News app. We'll provide all of the information you need prior to heading to the polls, where to vote, a preview of your ballot, and where the candidates stand on the issues in your community. Just scan the QR code or tap on the voter guide in the app to find all the essential voting information you need before casting your ballot. For our podcast listeners, we're going to take a short break. For our YouTube listeners, stay right here. Okay, so on to the comptroller's race. Bobby Cuza, you've been covering the race. It hasn't been getting that much attention. We did host a debate, but these two candidates, Mark Levine, the Manhattan Borough President, and Justin Brannan, the Brooklyn City Councilman, we've talked about this, and I feel like I stole your phrase that you said on air a couple weeks ago, and I just continued to repeat it. I know, I'm sorry. It is not about substance, it's about style.
Right, because they're so aligned on so many of the issues. I mean, you saw this. We had a debate last week. There was a debate prior to that on Pix 11, and they give the same answers to so many questions. I mean, they're both, I would argue that they're both pretty progressive Democrats, even though Justin Brannan is the one who's gotten the endorsements from more progressive elected officials, more progressive groups, the Working Families Party. But, they both want to use the city pension fund, the pension funds, which is really one of their primary jobs, is managing $300 billion in pension funds. They both want to use that money and leverage it to advance policy goals, right? Whether that's climate or whether it's building affordable housing. Justin Brannan wants to leverage that money to create childcare, to create universal childcare. And then, they're asked about, would you divest from Tesla? And they both say, they get the same argument why they would. They both talk about reining in police overtime. Like, on every issue, they sound pretty similar. But on style, they're not that different. I mean, I don't want to say these are like polar opposites, because in a lot of ways, they're both politicians, they're both
likable, and they're both
very likable, they're both personable, they're both good in front of a camera, right?
Yep.
I mean,
reporters
love Justin Brannan and Mark Levine because they're accessible. They always give a good soundbite. Right, they're both pretty well known. Now, Mark Levine may have a slightly higher profile because he's the Manhattan Borough President. He was councilman for a long time before that. Justin Brannan, though, he's
the city finance chair.
Yes, he's the chair of the finance committee for the city council. So, he really does know. They both know their stuff, but Brannan knows the city budget inside and out. This has been his job for the last, I don't know how many years, fighting
2 terms
on the budget. So, but, I think Brannan has his different personality, right? He's a little bit rougher around the edges.
Brash. He's got all these tattoos.
He's very Brooklyn.
Right.
He's in a band, punk rock band.
I don't know if I don't think he's still in a band.
Kind of a hipster. No, he'll perform sometime.
Really?
Yeah, he did. He has at least twice within the past 2 years.
But he used to be in like a legitimate punk rock band.
He was, but he is perform. I think he did a fundraiser. But either way,
he played.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I think he played bass.
But there hasn't been a lot of polling. There hasn't been a lot of polling in the comptroller's race.
See, our YouTube listeners can now see the demonstration that Bern gave of the bass.
School of Rock.
Our podcast listeners are missing out on that demonstration.
Yes. Anyway, Brannan has ground to make up, right? Levine has been leading in the polls.
But there's barely been any polling, and there's so many undecideds that it's really hard to tell. But already, you mentioned it, Mark Levine obviously has a lot more name recognition because he's representing a whole borough. We can't talk about this that much longer, so Bern, you have the final say on this.
I was going to say, Mark Levine speaks Spanish fluently, and that I think is very helpful for him because he's able to go on all the Spanish media and run ads in Spanish, and also maybe pick up a demographic that Brannan maybe is not able to jump into as easily because he does not speak Spanish. He doesn't speak Spanish. But also, their ads have been fun. Brannan, he did this like Coney Island ad.
Everybody loves going to Coney Island.
Everyone loves going to Coney Island, but meanwhile, I'm like, I'm not getting on one of those rides. I'm scared. I'm not getting on one of those rides.
I just put my son, now I digress and we have to.
But either way,
I just put my son on one on
the point
week.
is, who votes the most? Brooklyn turnout, right? Brooklyn turnout and early voting has come out.
Mamdani turnout helps Justin.
He was endorsed by Bernie Sanders,
right?
which I was surprised
And he was a
at.
delegate for Bernie in 2020? When was the last time we had an election? I'm just kidding. But in 2020, he was a Bernie delegate in 2020, which always is surprising to me because I'm like, Justin Brannan strikes me as a moderate, but he actually is pretty progressive. But both of them are often out there on the cameras. And then, like Bobby said, their main job is going to be investing and making money for the retirees, doing a couple audits, and maybe running for mayor.
A couple audits and running for mayor. Okay.
That's it.
We're going to have to leave it there.
That's it.
That's going to do it for this week's episode. You can always watch us on Inside City Hall Monday through Friday at 7. And we love your feedback. Send us an email at yourstoryNewYork1@charter.com. You can subscribe to Off Topic wherever you get your podcast. You can comment on the YouTube page about the podcast. And if you like what you're hearing, leave a review. If you don't like what you're hearing, you can leave a review too. We'll read it and maybe consider it. Thanks to our producer, Anthony Roman, in the corner. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next week.
So long, farewell.